What I want to talk to you today are two things that reflect the mission of the Maine Maritime Museum in several ways. First, we intend to be a member of the community. And our community is not a single island. It is a community that stretches perhaps from Cape Elizabeth in the west to Camden in the east, with a big focus on the central Maine area of Bath, Brunswick, Damerscott, and that area. So these programs are designed to be responsive to community needs. The second thing we're interested in is being a dynamic place, not a static place where you go and look at pictures, but a dynamic place where every day something is happening. And if you want to jump on your private plane and get up there for this afternoon, we have an opening at 5 o'clock called Return to the Tropics, Maine's Relationship to the Caribbean. I emailed the executive director and said, I'm in the tropics. It's 65 degrees on Nantucket and sunny. And Peggy Godwin took an outdoor shower today. So, I mean, there are all sorts of wonderful tropical things going on here. The other thing that this is about is what I would call belonging. We all have a need to be part of an organization, be part of a family, be part of an institution, to be connected to a place and time. And the museum strives to do that in a variety of ways, and these stories are two ways to do that. What I intend to do is spend maybe 15 or 20 minutes on the boat building program, and then take questions or comments, and then 15 or 20 minutes on the restoration of the Mary E, and take questions on that, if that's agreeable. So the boat building program starts on our campus, which is a 20-acre campus on the Kennebec River. We are on the site of the only surviving active shipyards in Bath, other than the Bath Iron Works, which is a half-mile up the road, up the river, which launches destroyers of two classes, and they recently sent one down the river. I think it was 10 days ago. The Thomas Hudner destroyer left Bath for the full-time activity of the Navy. The boat on the left is the Wyoming, the largest wooden ship built in the United States, launched on December 9th, 1909. The Mary E was built a half mile to the north of there on what is now Bath Iron Works, and that was launched in the fall of 1906. On the right, you see a sculpture that is exactly the size and dimensions of the Wyoming, resting exactly on the place in the shipyard that the Wyoming was built. She was built in 11 months, from January to December, outdoors with no real power tools. It's an extraordinary tribute to the skill and endurance of the Maine boat building community. She foundered in 1921 off, I believe, Pollock Rip, and with a loss of all hands. The number of hands on this vast boat was probably 11 or 12. There's some argument about whether a cabin boy was there or not there. Anyway, that's the Wyoming. That's part of our campus. An aerial view now gives you the overview. To the far left is the modern museum buildings, galleries that look like tents stacked up. To the right of that is the mold loft where ships were lofted to full scale. To the upper right of that is a Corten steel replica of the blacksmith shop. Behind that is the paint and trunnel shop. To the right of that is the mill shop. Coming over to the Victorian house, that is the shipyard owner's home, which is now part of the museum. Next to that is his carriage house, and behind that is the boat shop, where much of our story will unfold. As you come down, the little building just to the right of the stern of the Wyoming replica is the yachtsman's quarters. We have dockage for and moorings for visiting yachtsmen. To the right of that is the lobstering exhibit. The two steel structures on the far right are essentially closed exhibit space for about 120 watercraft that are historic. But anybody who's interested in seeing those, we can get you in and give you the details, mostly for researchers. So then we come to the boat shop. This was taken last March. I was going to come down here and give a talk in March, but you closed the island for 3 days. I don't know why you did that, but my wife said she didn't want to spend 3 days in a motel in Hyannis. I don't know what got into her mind. Anyway, this is what the kids see when they come. And I ask you to think back, if you were willing or able, to think back to when you were in 7th and 8th grade. Did you ask yourself, you were probably in a strange building. Most communities had a isolation program for 7th and 8th graders for good reason. They put them in a middle school. And they get to this new building, they didn't know their way around. They said, do I belong here? And all of a sudden, the boys look around, they say, wait a minute, all the girls are taller than I am in 7th grade. How do I fit in? It was a whole 2 years of trauma. Did you belong to this group? Did you not belong to the group? Were you good in wood shop? How about print shop? Who took shop in grammar school? Nobody. We took it in middle school. There were many things going on that were confusing. We get these kids from the Woolwich Middle School and several others. And the first thing we do when they come in is we give them a name tag like this. I didn't wear this to be identified today. I wore this to let you know that when the kid arrives here, and we get 15 of them from the Woolwich Middle School every year, they have their own name tag there. They also have their own tape measure with their name on it. And I didn't steal this from a kid because there's no name on it. They also get a family membership for a year in the museum, where they are identified as the owner of the membership. So in some ways, they are made responsible for the family using the museum. And they do indeed do that. So this is the enrollment. 21 boys and 36 girls. That stands out, does it not? The girls actually turn out to be a little better boat builders than the boys at this age. And that is because they do not have the gene that says fast is good. We try to teach some basic lessons in life, and one of them is slow is faster. Take your time and get it right the first time. This year in the Woolwich program, we have about an even mix of boys and girls. This is the first project. Now, I would pick a slide where the kid's not naming his name, having his name tag on, you know. I look at it this morning and I said, I'm going to make a big deal about name tags, and then the next two kids do not have their name tags on. I didn't bring you the picture of the launch where nobody had a life jacket on, which we've hidden away for perpetuity. This is the first job. Make a three-legged stool using essentially hand tools throughout. How do they make a three-legged stool? Well, we first give them a piece of wood and ask them to identify that wood. That happens to be a piece of mahogany in the middle, and they're told to make a finger joint out of that, or a mortise and tenon joint. And we teach them how to do that with hand tools, largely a combination square and a Japanese pull saw. They make the mortise and tenon joint. The next week they make a scarf joint. We teach them ratios. The ratio in shipbuilding for scarf joints. Scarf joints are ones that overlap like this, sometimes called board extender joints. They learn ratios. For this project, they make a 6-to-1 scarf joint. For boat building, we use 8-to-1 as a more common ratio. And then the easiest, but the most fragile joint is the butt joint, where you take a piece of wood, you cut it in half, and then glue it back together. And we talk to them about why is it the weakest joint. Well, the end grains do not absorb glue. The end grains are not much surface area, more surface area here. We talk about the mechanical advantage of the mortise and tenon joint. If you do it right, there's friction that keep it together, or if you're doing it in a corner, there's structural strength that keeps it together. So there are a lot of little lessons buried in that simple stool. The legs are made in octagonal shape. How do you make an octagon out of a square? So we have a little geometry there. You make an X on the end of the square. At the center point of the X, you set your combination square to the corner. You then use that to rotate around, and that gives you your tick mark for the first part of your octagon. It's pretty simple, but they say, gee whiz, I never knew how to do that. You then plane that down to 8 sides. That's their first project. That goes home. It went home last week. Today, they will have finished yesterday much of this toolbox. This is their first introduction to power tools. We use the bandsaw to cut out some of these pieces. I should make a note, with 4 schools bringing kids in 4 separate days, Monday is a day when volunteers in the boat shop are in the mill room making up the materials for these kids to use, because we do not want them running many sheets of wood through planers and other devices. So we set this up for them so they are essentially finishing the project. But you'll also notice, or not notice, that there are no screws visible on either end of the side of the toolbox. That's because they are countersunk and bunged, plugged with wooden plugs. We have a bung cutter, and we teach the kids how to cut bungs. All of this is part of what's going to become boat building. They have a round handle. We give them a square piece of wood and ask them to plane it to round. And so they go from 8-sided to 16-sided and then start using sandpaper. The same way we're building in the part of the boat shop that you're not going to see on the slides, the new topmasts for the Mary E. She sailed this year bald-headed, but we'll get into that in a minute. So these are the 2 projects that lead up to going down to a sawmill that's about 2 miles down the road from the museum, which has been in the Morse family. That's John Morse pointing out where his original sawmill stood in 1896 on a marsh which used tidal power. And he explains to the kids about tidal gates and the use of tidal power. His sawmill was converted to electricity in 1931, and we've been using that to take trees down there and cut them up into cedar planks for the kids to use. So they see the boat come from a tree all the way to a finished boat. Now, what's going on here? I apologize for this. I grabbed my phone when I saw Kurt doing this the other day. He is blowing through a piece of red oak into a jar of water and blowing bubbles, illustrating to the kids that we don't use red oak in boat building because the way the capillaries in the red oak run, they run from one end all the way to the other. And if you had the lung power, you could wrap your mouth around the trunk of an oak tree and blow out the other end. That's the way red oak works. The kids are amazed that we can blow bubbles through a chunk of wood. I was shaking, that's why the... Now here's an old guy helping a young kid after they finished the lofting, which begins in January. We loft the boats to full scale on these pieces of Luan plywood that we paint white. In the old days, they just lofted it on the floor. We used to do it in the lofting room, but the curators got sick of our disrupting some old lofting lines that were there, so now we do it on fresh sheets of plywood. And what we're setting up here are the station molds for the boat they're going to be building. That station mold is for a Yankee tender, which was designed by Joel White, 12 foot 3 inches in length. The station molds are set up on strong backs, and what are we doing here? We have a steam box, that fancy piece of box hung by some rebar off a rafter, connected to a half keg of beer, empty, now filled with water, sitting on two concrete blocks that you can't see that hold it up with a propane burner underneath, connected by that long hose up there. We're cooking the chine logs that will form the bottom of the boat and the side of the boat. These are white oak, not red oak, as the previous lesson indicated. You also get a little sense of the boat shop. We have a circular sander here, a belt sander behind that, a bandsaw here, a bandsaw behind there, a giant bandsaw in the corner, and we've just gotten 3 new Italian bandsaws, which are pretty neat. And a drill press over here where we can make bungs and drill out the holes to receive the legs of the 3-legged stool. The boat shop is about 70 feet by 35 feet, to give you a sense of dimension. And like any good boat shop, we have more clamps than almost any other tool in the boat shop. Now the chine has come out of the steam box. And notice the kids are all wearing gloves. The chine is hot. It has cooked for about an hour and 15 minutes. The rule is that you cook whatever wood it is, whatever dimension it is, by the width in inches, an inch for an hour. So if it's 1.5 inches wide, you cook it for an hour and a half. We did have a kid who stuck his head in the steam box to see if it was ready. We are not permitted to touch kids. This is the modern age, right? We touched this kid. He was removed expeditiously, and all he had to show for it was a red face, which was part from the steam box and part from the humiliation he took from being hauled away. So this is bent on the outside of the first plank, the garboard strake, and it will stay there for a week. It will take that shape, and then the next week we'll drop it into that notch and fasten it and then plane it flat to receive the bottom. We're going to move more quickly through this process here because I want to give you a sense that we do like to teach kids safety. And we talk about hearing loss in the first few weeks. And so if you're not wearing hearing protection when you're using a power tool, you'll get hauled out. And most of us walk around the shop with our earmuffs hanging around our neck. This is Natalie. Natalie was occasionally wrong, but never in doubt. She knew how to do everything before anybody told her. And she had a pretty good sense of what to do. But here Natalie is in the boat because we fasten these planks with clinch nails, copper nails. She's holding what is called a bucking iron, which is a piece of iron behind there, and one of her colleagues is tapping the nail through. And this is where girls are better than boys. They know tapping and then bend the nail over. The boys come up and they think they're Mookie Betts trying to hit a home run. You know, they slam the boat, leave a big dent in the cedar, and make the clinch nail not fit as nicely as it should. So Natalie is getting ready to do some clinch nailing. Now we've moved 3 months and have the boat ready to be fitted out. This is a big day. We take it off the station molds. You can see the station mold behind there. And there's a story about that boat we're restoring behind that, but we can't get into that today. You'll also notice the amount of Sikaflex that's lying between the bottom and the chine log that holds the bottom and the sides together. Every year the kids say, why did I use so much Sikaflex? Because it's a bear to take off. And we say, we don't know why you use so much Sikaflex, but it looks good going on. Now when you have to clean it up. So we're going to move quickly to a fitted out boat. Aren't these pretty boats? The colors are picked by the kids. And notice the carving on the stem heads. The kids pick out a design, and we have a master carver, a picture of whom I'll show you later in the Mary E. And they carve the... Now the entire school of the Woolwich Middle School shows up for the launch. 15 kids in a whole school lined on the banks. They carry them down and put them in the water, and then I bang off a 10-gauge signal cannon that used to belong to the Nantucket Yacht Club, but it was faulty, and I have modestly repaired it. I hit the firing pin with a hammer instead of the little pull, but it does make a noise, and we splash these boats. The kids get in. There are no life jackets visible. Let me assure you that the life jackets are in the boats and will be worn. So what does this mean for a child? It means that you're a unique member of a class now. You belong to something. You're a boat builder. You can call yourself a boat builder. And when I speak as the former chairman of the board to these kids at the launch, I say, wherever you go, put on your resume that you built a boat. It will give you a leg up almost over everybody else. And here's what one of our students had to say, and let's take a moment to look at this. Everyone worries about popularity and fitting in, but we enter the boat shop, that goes away. It's pretty special. Does not usually happen. This is a big thing. Before the program, I felt like an outsider. And Courtney used to never go to lunch. She would have her clarinet with her, sit in a corner and play clarinet. And somewhere around January, she put the clarinet away and became part of the lunch group and went out, and we built a toboggan in the boat shop, so we slide down hills after lunch. Boat building is for me an experience that will last me and my family a lifetime. And every year, there's a kid like Courtney, may not write like that, and often there are two. So, let me conclude. This was a launch that Joanne and I went to for the South Bristol kids. South Bristol is on the Damariscotta Point. It is probably in Maine, one of the few almost totally lobster fishing communities. Stonington might be another. But there are relatively few that are pure fishing communities. These kids have been coming for 20-some years. Some woman there thought it was important for them to learn traditional skills. The harbor is filled with lobster boats and skiffs. There are no yachts there. Several years ago, someone complained to the Civil Liberties Union that we had prayer in school when these ships were launched, these boats were launched, because the tradition in that community is no boat hits the water without some prayer being offered for the safety of its crew. So they were asked to cease and desist. It made the national news. And we were advised in the museum to make no comment on it. So I'm making no comment on it, but I'm telling you a story. So Joanne and I go to the launch. We'd never been to a South Bristol launch before. They don't carry the boats down. Some guy from the boatyard who's big and burly drives a forklift down and picks these two tiny boats up and drives them into the water. As they're about to hit the water, there's a conversation that goes on between the driver of the boat, of the forklift, and the principal of the school. And it goes like this. "Joe, how are you feeling today?" He said, "Some kind of allergy going on. June, all sorts of things going on. I'm feeling a little sneezy." And then with a giant sneeze, everybody says, "God bless you," and the boat goes into the water. So another thing I want to talk about is resiliency. And what we try to do today with these kids is not only give them a sense of place, a sense of belonging, a sense of skills, but also a sense of resiliency. We tell them there are no mistakes in boat building that cannot be fixed. There's always a way to put another piece of wood on. They spend a good part of their life fixing mistakes of nature called knots that appear in sheets of, in boards of cedar. They cut the knots out, they make bungs, they put the bungs in, they sand it, and they make a clear board out of one that was fairly knotty. So let me stop there and ask if there are any questions or comments about the boat building program. And after that, I'll swing into the restoration of the Mary E., which is also very exciting. Yes, sir?
How are the students selected?
I'm sorry?
How are the students selected?
How are the students selected? They self-select up to a point. There are kids who are deemed to be in need of the boat shop program, and they are added to the mix. If there are more than 15 who self-select, and there's a culture that develops in the school when everybody sees what's happening and how special these kids are and how beautiful these boats are, a lot of hands go up. If there's too many people involved, asked to be involved, they're asked to write a little essay, 3 or 4 sentences about why they want to do this. And then the principal, not we, selects them, and we go over and meet with the principal, get a little preview. I will tell you, this year I've had a kid I've worked with now 3 or 4 days. He is absolutely brilliant at terms of understanding the concepts. He is brilliant on execution. He takes time. He can't read or write. 8th grade. Extraordinary. This may be his first really positive experience with his peers. We had another kid a couple of years ago who was not strong academically. When we got into the planking, which requires an overlap of 3/4 of an inch, spacing of nails 4 inches apart, and the location of the nail 3/8 of an inch into the lap. He goes over to a bench, and about a half hour later he comes back with a jig. One side is 3/4 of an inch, one side is 3/8 of an inch. It happens to be 4 inches long. We said, make 10 of those. It's a tool we use. So kids are very adaptable, even the kids that are not doing well academically. Everybody should have a success at the boat shop. Other questions or comments? Steve?
So, do these programs take time away from the school curriculum?
Yes. We have them every Wednesday for a full school day. They have to make up the programs that they have missed. So it is, it's a challenge for them, but it's a pretty rigorous program. I have over there the syllabus, which we've distilled down into months. We have it by the day. I've shared some with James so that you can see this is a very detailed program. We have learning objectives every day. They come in, they sit down, we go through what those learning objectives are. At the end of the day, we review them, and we give reports back to the school. So it's a fairly rigorous program, and it's evolved so that we now have enough STEM stuff in there so that, you know, for example, we had some science folks come in who they're retired scientists who roam around the state of Maine teaching a seminar, talking about adhesives. One of the guy comes in and he said, I know a little bit about adhesives. I'm the guy who invented the adhesive that holds Velcro tape to the fabric. Boy, did he get attention. We also teach about displacement. The final exam. Let's see how many of you can do the final exam. You're in a canoe by yourself in a swimming pool. You have a piece of chalk. Make a mark where the water is. Your friend on the shore gives you a 25-pound half cinder block. Put that between your legs. Go back to the wall and mark where the water is. You now have 2 marks. One of the questions is, which one is higher? But the trick is, now Mark McCarroll comes along and says, give me that cinder block. I'm going to lower it carefully to the bottom of the pool. So the cinder block is still in the water, not in your canoe. Make a mark on the wall and tell me, now identify the 3 marks. Right, if you get it right, and I'll send it back to you. Other questions?
What do you do with the boats when they're done?
Many years, a parent or two families will buy the boats. If that doesn't happen, one boat goes to the museum and one boat goes to the school. And they then raffle them, sell them, do whatever. We now sell these for about $1,500 a piece, up from $1,200 2 years ago. Which leads me to a question, how do we pay for this program? Most of us don't get paid, we're volunteers, but the boat shop has costs, one of them being insurance. You put kids with power tools, your insurance agent will run for the hills, and you run for your checkbook. We have to heat and light and buy equipment from time to time, plus all the wood. We scavenge wood all winter long when there's blowdown, but we still have to buy wood from lumber yards. So it costs us a little over $22,000 per class. So that's a day for 9 months. And that is typically borne part by the school, part by the community, and part by the largesse of some people who think this is a good program. Other questions or comments? Yes?
Does the education department in the state of Maine have a say in this?
The question is, does the education department in the state of Maine have any oversight in this? And the answer is, I don't know. I don't think so. I don't think so. We are organized into school districts. We are in regional school unit 1. So when it snows, we listen to whether we're going to have boat shop or not on those Wednesdays. Any other questions? Let's go to the Mary E. I have a lot of interest in this. It was for sale in 1964 for $200. I arranged for the museum to buy it for $140,000. Not then, in 2016. So what happened? If you didn't think what the ad said was true, here's the photograph that went with the ad. But a fellow Mainer, boat builder, got her floating, and now she's at the grounds of the museum in 1964. This is a year later, and if you look up above the boat, you can see the shipyard owner's house, and next to it the carriage house that is now the front door of the museum. So this is exactly where we brought her back to be restored. So she went in the water then in 1965, and in April of 2017, in April of 2017, she sailed back where she had been wintered in Pelham, New York at the New York Athletic Club yacht facility off Pelham, New York. She sailed up on her own bottom. She'd been in the water all winter. Some of her seams had dried out. I was not permitted by my wife to go, probably prudent thing. She leaked like mad when she got her nose down. And the best advice I gave to the crew was take some large plastic bags and put all your sleeping gear in that. We constructed a pavilion. Volunteers did most of this. If you're in the mood to build a pavilion, buy the trusses. They're cheaper to buy than they are to build. We did that. We got it put together. You'll notice it's called a pavilion. Part of what I did as chairman was try to raise money. People will pay for a pavilion. They don't like sheds. So now we had the Mary E. in the pavilion. We were in the process of putting the roof on the pavilion. And we did a photometric survey. We had had 2 surveys in the water, and both of those surveys said there's about $400,000 more to do in terms of replacing the deck and all the houses and some of the futoks. So we got her in the shed, we did and then we did what's called an invasive survey. This is what an invasive survey looks like. The primary tool is a chainsaw or a sawzall. The photometric survey suggested we had three very significant problems. The stern was 14 inches lower than it should have been, because probably when the 1964 restoration was done, the horn timber that was available was 14 inches shorter than it should have been. And somehow the boat builder did not have a stretcher to make it to the right dimension. So what he did is built it that way and then tried to dope up the shear so it looked reasonable. Secondly, she had a twist. If you stood at the foremast, the stem was to the left by about 7 inches. Significant twist. And she was asymmetrical. The port side had a somewhat of a resemblance to the starboard side, but we would call it a cousin relationship, not a sibling relationship. So what do? You tear the stern out, and one of our shipwrights starts to rebuild it. Now, someone may ask, where did you get your shipwrights? Well, in Wooden Boat, the year before, there had been a wonderful story about itinerant gypsy boat builders who had recently restored the schooner Bowden, which belongs to the Maine Maritime Academy, and had redecked it. And Aaron was part of that. The lead shipwright in this is a fellow by the name of Andros Kyprogaros, a Cypriot who has lived in Maine for a long period of time. We had these wonderful shipwrights, and I was at the boat shop a couple, 3 times a week, and was at the Mary E. during this restoration at least once a week and more frequently. Many of these photos are mine. So we start to rebuild the transom. You see, we have to come all the way back. We're building and putting in new tail feathers. The whole transom is rebuilt all the way back. Another photo of Aaron. Now, how do we handle the twist? Well, it's sort of like boat building orthodonture. You put a brace on and tighten it up every couple of days, sort of like the orthodontist does with your teeth. And slowly, 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 it comes back. Now, to do that, he's now probably 3/4 of the way back. You have to take the knight head out, and you have to take a lot of the planking around it out to get it to move. But she did come back into true, as you can see. Now you'll also notice that all the planking all the way down to the waterline was taken off. And that's because we found it needed to be taken off, and to solve the problem of the asymmetry, we had to have it off. We decided by look that the starboard side was the fair side, and we laid the port side out to balance the starboard side. Is there any magic in the look and feel? Three shipwrights look at it and say, this looks better than that. It's sort of like going to the ophthalmologist. They drop a lens in and said, is this better than that? And you're the judge. So we're the judge on this. You'll see how far out it was. We're looking at the ledge beam here, and you see there's good 4 inches. And we're looking aft here. So this is the starboard side that we moved out. And a similar story looking forward. You'll notice there's some snow on the walkway here. We wrapped the pavilion in plastic around the 1st of November of 2017, and we took a furnace out of a house we had recently bought to complete our campus and put it down there. It got the temperature to around freezing most days. I discovered that shipwrights have all sorts of planks that require drinking. This was the drink being hoisted when we finally decided we had the thing, A, unwarped, B, the transom fixed, and C, we had two sides that looked similar. We'll give you the whiskey plank later and the rum plank after that. So now we've got the thing squared up. That piece of shiny metal in the middle and the green stuff under is a giant old pre-Second War diesel engine, which is known in the trade as green leakers. They do work, helped her get all the way from New York to Bath, but they weigh a lot, they leak a lot, and we were able to persuade Cummins to give us a new restored engine. So the green leaker comes out. I think it's being used as a mooring someplace. Transom coming back together. We'll move quickly through this. You can see planking. You can see the green leaker coming out. You can see mast blanks arriving from Wisconsin. We discovered that despite the survey having not identified this, we had some very significant dry rot in both masts. And I suggested Bondo, the shipwrights suggested new masts. I was worrying about the money. They were worrying about the proper way to do things. I should say a word about the money. We had 28 trustees at the time. We're now down to 26. Two more are coming on board. We have a term limit on our trustees. I would say when we were looking at this boat to buy it, fully half of the trustees said this is the most stupid, imprudent thing you can possibly do. We had a trustee who owned 2 old wooden boats. She said, it's really quite simple. My boats are like having 2 kids in an Ivy League college with no financial aid, and they get arrested once a year. So there's a surprise cost that always comes in bailing the kids out. So we got 2 new masts, which we had to shape. You can see there's still snow on the ground. You can see the mast blank, the 2 mast blanks that have just come off the truck from Wisconsin. This is the whiskey plank. It's going on. Kurt Spiridakis, who is my boss at the boat shop, is our director of historic traditional skills and old boats. And that's one of the shipwrights. Whiskey plank is the last plank that goes on the sides of the boat. So now you see, and she was fastened with combination of trennels, spelled tree nails, but are really used as trennels. The entire Wyoming was built with trennels. There is a trennel shop at the museum with lathes that turn out trennels, and large galvanized spikes. Now we took the kids down, every week we would take the kids down to see the project of the Mary. It was very exciting for them because here's a scarf joint. This is what you did. Now the ratio here, that's an 18-foot long length of oak, white oak, and the scarf has been cut into that. Now we're putting the ceilings back in. That's 2-inch dimension pine. I should say a word about the pine we were using. It comes from a stand of white pine in northern Vermont that was planted in 1906. A coincidence, not a plan. It had been harvested for the deck of the Bowden, and so Andros knew where it was, and we had access to it. One of the things a shipwright can do for you is locate the wood you need. It needs to be the proper wood. Most of the framing is white oak and some black locust. And I can't tell you whether there was any reason to use one or the other. It was just what was available. When we get to another photo, you'll see the knees going in, 26 knees that came from both Nova Scotia and from Wisconsin. So now you begin to see the knees. The knees are these braces in here. We have 26 of them going up both the starboard and port side. We could not get enough of them out of Wisconsin. So a volunteer jumped on the ferry and went to Nova Scotia with his truck and brought back knees that we could use. It really was an extraordinary effort to get this thing done and in the water. So now we have a little spring snow. We use a leaf blower to get rid of the snow. We're starting to fair everything. We're deck planking. We have Gino Scalzi, who is an itinerant caulker. And if you've never been in a boat shed where caulking is going on, it's almost like music. You hear that clink, clink, clink of the hammer, and as it changes tone, he knows that he's gotten the caulking home. He moves on to the next thing, and he's rolling it as he goes, and he did the caulking on the Bowden as well. Gino is a real asset. So new engine bed logs and engine bed created. The deck is complete, and lo and behold, chance for another event. The deck plank is finished. The mast partners are in, and you can see the night head is in place. So we're getting ready to be done. Notice the quarter bits have been mortised out. They really are impressive. They use what I would call a drill press with a chainsaw on it to cut those mortises. Very cool tool. We have a ship saw, by the way, that's been in the museum since 1940. We restored it and it was used in this restoration. And this restoration was open for people to see, and we're open all year round, and so people were tramping through here all the while. We didn't tell our insurance guy. So now the house is coming up. Beautiful carpentry. This is a fishing boat. This is not a yacht. But I have to tell you, these boatwrights just worked beautifully, as you can see. Installing a non-traditional motor control. Color was from what it was in 1906. New steel, more new steel. So now we have the chain plates in. Paint donated by Epiphanes, if that's how you say it. A huge gift. Many gifts in kind. Here's our Latin teacher, wood carver, who teaches the kids how to carve stems and was carving for the Mary E. You can see the result of his work. We're now finishing up the painting. She was originally black and then made green, starting to look pretty special, and about to go out of the yard. Andros is not running to get a haircut. I don't know why he was going, but he's on his way out. The truck is there. And she's now at Robin Hood Marine. Joanne and I were there at 7:30 in the morning. And we had 4 fire hoses and 4 pumps on board. All of them were working actively for the first couple of hours. And then she tightened up, came back to you can just see at the museum, she's there, dead eyes installed. I had the foolishness to go ask the rigger, how do you tighten a dead eye? And he said, a come-along, of course. Now, I don't know whether they had come-alongs in 1906. Maybe they did, or some similar device. But those are the dead eyes that were used in the rigging. A mast is now ready to go out. And by the way, just day before yesterday, I checked over at Robin Hood, and they were slushing the masts. We all know what slushing means. I didn't. It's a mixture of linseed oil and pine tar that you put on the mast to keep the hoops free from running up and down. Now the Mary E is partially rigged, and we had a party. And it was quite a party. Hundreds of people there under the tent. And at the end, I had the privilege with my fellow trustee presenting Kurt with one of the trail boards from the Mary E. original. The back of it was signed by everybody who touched or felt the boat in the course of the 13 months of restoration. So pretty special. So then she was rededicated and sailed on a maiden voyage. The fellow on the left is Mr. Anonymous, great friend, gave us $250,000 to get started. And we had other generous people. Here she is sailing in her home waters on Long Reach. But she participated in schooner days in Portland, and on her way back stopped in Harpswell, where Joanne and I live, and here she is coming into Harpswell. Again, she's sailing bald-headed, and she'll look a lot better next year when we have the topmasts on. About 1 in 8 visitors to the museum have been aboard and crawled around here this summer. We have about 55,000 visitors a year at the museum. Actually, it's more like 1 in 5 visited her because she wasn't in the water from January to June, and she's not in the water today, or she is in the water over at Robin Hood, so got a lot of attention. So that's the story on Mary E. It's a story of resilience. It's a resilience of a thing, not a resilience of a person. But it has come back twice now, twice. And it's a pretty impressive and exciting thing. And I must say, as chairman of the board during that, and living it almost on a day-by-day basis, what a privilege it was to be part of that extraordinary effort to bring the Mary E. back. So thank you very much. I'm happy to take any questions. 5 minutes. Yes, and then Dorothy.
Do you know who Mary E. was?
Well, I had a book on Mary E. that I was going to bring, and I somehow left it at home. Such a nice day. We were doing things outdoors this morning. We collected all of the Mary E.'s who claimed some relationship, and none of them are legit. I hope they would, because then as a fundraiser, I could go say, Mary, are you Mary E.? We have an opportunity for you to be immortal. We sent curators to Block Island, and we went through all sorts of documents. This boat fished off Block Island for 25 years, from 1906. Now, some of the fishing had transport of beverages involved in the fish hold, but they called it fishing. She's had an extraordinary career, but we don't know who Mary E. was. We've given it a hard look. Garth?
You said that the sides were not symmetrical.
That's correct.
And was it because the frames were not symmetrical? And if it was, did you have to shave some frames down or something to adjust them?
The question is, why was she unsymmetrical? The theory, as best we can determine from our shipwrights, was that when Thomas Hagen rebuilt her in 1964, the scantlings were light and uneven. Scantlings meaning the dimensions of the frame. And so all the frames came out, and they were all replaced. So they were all cut to be the same, one for starboard, one for port.
This time, you replaced all of them?
Yes, we replaced every frame. Peggy?
Oh, excuse me, in the prior with the kids' boat, you were able to bend that wood by putting it in that cooker thing.
Right.
Right, I don't know the right terms for this. How in the world do you do it with something this big? Do you have a huge oven? Or?
We had a very large steam box, 24 feet long. The only real bending we did, the pine you can bend on the boat. That's why you need big clamps. But the beam, the shelf beam, was made of 3 pieces of white oak that had to be steamed and bent. We bent some of the frames as well. And my job on some mornings was to get a couple or 3 5-gallon tank cans and put them in the back of my car and go get diesel for the steamer, which is just a cooker. And you build a big box, and you slide your timbers in there, and you put some dowels in so they're sort of standing free, and visitors would stand around, and Andros would say, "What kind of knot would you like me to tie with this wood when it comes out?" Because you do get it to be reasonably flexible. With those big chunks, they were, I guess, 6-bys that were becoming the shelf beam. They were cooked for close to 5 hours. Yes?
What's the technical name for this style of boat?
It's a two-masted fishing schooner. It's 60 feet on the deck, spar length 70-some. We changed the rig to be back to the original. She was operating in Essex for the Connecticut River Museum under private ownership. The owner got a nickel and the museum got a nickel for the fair. So she'd been sailing. You know, it's pretty extraordinary. She's the last surviving fishing schooner built in Maine. And, you know, some were built in Nova Scotia. The Sherman Zwicker, which is now in New York, a much larger vessel, some were built in Massachusetts. But we like to say she's sort of a Ford F-150. She was the work boat in the early part of the 20th century. And it's like going to Detroit and finding the last F-150 that's still operating. She had a Coast Guard certificate when she arrived. She now has a Coast Guard certificate to carry 25 people, which we never do because it would be very crowded now. And the Coast Guard were there every week. They were fascinated with this. They loved the process. And the stability test was another story. They come along and they take a piece of, I didn't bring this as a prop, but the Coast Guard had some of this. And they took some measurements and they put that on the side of the boat. And then they said, okay, put those 6 55-gallon drum barrels up there on the edge of the deck, fill them with water, and see if the blue tape stays where it should stay. And they kept pumping water into the drums, and she tilted over, and the masking tape was above the water, and they said, you're good to go. High technology.
So where is she docked and what is she going to be used for?
Well, that's a good question. She is docked at the museum. She goes off the dock this past year about 3 or 4 afternoons a week. The museum lives on a body of water in the Kennebec called Long Reach, and the name implies that you have a long reach. Unfortunately, one end of the Long Reach is a bridge, and a big chunk of the Long Reach is occupied by Bath Iron Works. And Bath Iron Works has these large inflatable rigid bottom boats with 50 caliber guns mounted on the front that patrol about half of Long Reach across because it is a marine restricted zone. So we're limited, plus we have about 5 or 6 knots of current. And this boat's hull speed is about 5 or 6 knots with all sails up. So Joanne and I were out in September, and we actually sailed for an hour in the same geographic place. Gee, nothing's moving. Water's going underneath. It was very pleasant. So we get her off the dock as much as we can. She is our ambassador. So she went to Boothbay Harbor for Schooner Days. She went to Portland for Schooner Days. She may get as far east as Camden for the Camden Regatta. So she's our ambassador. Will we put kids on her overnight? We've not fitted out the ship hold, the fish hold. It is a fish hold right now. We could put bunks in there, but we haven't done it. She does have a working head. The engine works beautifully. She has captain and mate quarters, but that's 2 berths. It was designed to go fishing, and that's what we restored her to. Joanne.
I would like to say that the captain of this boat is a wonderful woman.
Oh, good.
It's the Maine Maritime Academy.
Yay.
And she's also the one who put the engine in. She did all of that work. So
My wife is pointing out that Hannah Gray was our chief engineer. She is a graduate of Maine Maritime Academy, has her all oceans license. She was our, as I said, the engineer for all systems, including the engine. She's also one of our 4 captains that we use. Terrific, terrific woman. Jane.
What was the cost of the restoration?
Oh, the reason I asked you all here today, what was the cost of the restoration?
What are the operating costs?
Okay, 2 good questions. Opportunities for support are multiple. Our board said you can't do anything with this boat until you have the money in hand to do it. So as we identified problems, which came in big bunches, like the kids getting arrested, I had to work with our development office to find the money. We had a society called the 1906 Society for $1,906, or rounded up to $2,000 you can be a member of 1906, and a number of people in the community came forward and did that. We had some major donors. The total cost of the restoration and back in the water was about $960,000. Then there were costs associated with improving the waterfront to create dockage and access for her. A ramp, aluminum ramp that is ADA compliant for wheelchairs and so forth and so on. Floats, moorings for floats. We did not put in dolphins because of the current and ice. The ice runs down that river at 6 knots, just like everything else. And when a big chunk of ice hits a dolphin, it tends to take it out. We've lost dolphins. So we now have large granite moorings, and that secures the floats. That was about another $140,000. Then, being a responsible trustee, we have to burden all costs like you do in an academic institution with the appropriate overhead. And so we billed on a fully loaded basis all of the staff time involved in this, and that added another $100 and some thousand. So all in, we're about $1,300,000. All of that is paid for with pledges and cash. We have adequate cash flow to allow for pledges to come in at a later date. Your second part of your question, what does it cost to operate? We're budgeting $50,000 a year to do that. We've had some donations. For example, we have a wonderful canvas fitted top and frame, so we're not going to be wrapping it every year, and someone has donated that, which is about a $10,000 item. So I think we're still raising money, and we'd like to raise money for educational programs for kids. I didn't have a chance to talk about all the other educational programs we do. We have 7th graders who are curating their own exhibit this year. They come in with the white gloves and go through the collection and decide what they want to curate. So there's a lot going on with kids. Thank you. We're just about out of time, but
Who made the sails?
I should know that. I don't. It's a local sail maker, traditional sail maker. The 1906 sail has been around a long time. We're going to replace that. But we had to create new foresails because we changed the rig. Peggy? Thank you very much. I'm happy to stay and answer questions, but part of the issue is to run out of time before you run out of interest. Thank you.